"Boss, marry my ugly daughter or leave." The cowboy agreed. When he removed the veil, he was shocked. Jake was a cowboy who had spent most of his life under the vast, open skies of the countryside. He loved the wind whipping through his hair, the smell of hay and horses, and the freedom of working with the land and animals. Life was simple, but it was not always easy. Every day brought new challenges, from fixing broken fences to tending to sick horses or driving cattle through the rugged hills. Despite the hard work, Jake was proud of his life and of the small home he had built for himself near the ranches. He was known in his town as an honest and hardworking man. People trusted him because he always kept his word and treated everyone with respect. Jake didn't have much in terms of money, but he had a reputation that no amount of gold could buy. Still, like many others, he sometimes wished for a little more security. Life on the ranch could be unpredictable. Some months were full of plenty, with good sales of cattle and crops, while other months were lean, leaving him counting every coin just to pay for the essentials. One bright morning, as the sun rose over the rolling hills and painted the sky with shades of gold and pink, Jake was repairing a broken fence at the edge of his property. The sound of hooves approaching made him glance up. A large black horse rode slowly down the dirt road, and sitting atop it was Mr. Thompson, the wealthiest ranch owner in the region. Mr. Thompson was a tall, imposing man, known for his strict nature and careful management of his vast lands. People respected him and some even feared him, but Jake had always gotten along with him because of his honesty and diligence. "Morning, Jake," Mr. Thompson called as he dismounted. His boots kicked up small clouds of dust. "I need a word with you." Jake wiped his hands on his worn gloves and nodded. "Morning, sir. What can I do for you?" Mr. Thompson's expression was serious. He glanced around, making sure no one else was nearby. Then, in a low voice, he said something that made Jake blink in surprise. "Jake, I have a proposition for you. I want you to marry my daughter." For a moment, Jake thought he must have misheard. Marry Mr. Thompson's daughter. That was completely unexpected. He had known the daughter, of course, though only in passing. She was quiet, kept mostly to herself, and was not known for attending social events. People in town often described her as different or not very attractive, though Jake had never judged anyone that way. "Marry your daughter?" Jake asked slowly, trying to understand. "Yes," Mr. Thompson replied. "I need someone I can trust around my family. Someone honest, strong, and dependable. I've watched you work. You're a good man. My daughter, well, she needs a husband who will care for her properly. You can either accept this, or I have no further use for you at the ranch." Jake's mind raced. He had never expected a marriage proposal to come from Mr. Thompson, especially under such circumstances. He also knew the truth. The ranch job was an excellent opportunity. It paid well, provided stability, and gave him access to resources that he could never afford on his own. But marrying someone simply for a job, that was a big decision, one that carried weight beyond money. Still, Jake was practical. He thought about his life, his modest home, his small savings, and the uncertain future of being a lone cowboy. The offer, though strange, might actually be a solution. And then there was Mr. Thompson's daughter. Jake remembered meeting her once at a town gathering. She had been quiet but polite, always observing rather than speaking. She had a kind smile, even if people called her ugly behind her back. Jake had never believed in judging someone by looks alone. A person's heart mattered more. "All right, sir," Jake said after a long pause. "I'll do it. I'll marry your daughter." Mr. Thompson's eyes narrowed slightly, as if assessing Jake's sincerity. Then he nodded. "Very well, you'll have the details soon. But remember, Jake, this isn't just about appearance or wealth. You're being tested in ways you might not yet understand." Jake nodded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and curiosity. He had agreed, and now there was no turning back. He wondered what his life would be like, marrying someone he barely knew, and how his daily routine would change. But he also felt a strange sense of excitement. Life had thrown him a curveball, and he was ready to face it. Over the next few days, Jake continued his work on the ranch, though he noticed that townspeople began looking at him differently. Whispers followed him wherever he went, and curious eyes watched him closely. Some people shook their heads in disbelief, others chuckled quietly. Jake ignored it all. He had made his decision, and he would see it through. At the same time, Jake began thinking about the woman he would be marrying. He realized that he knew very little about her, and that thought both worried and intrigued him. What were her dreams, her fears, her hopes for the future? Would they get along? Could he build a life with someone he had never truly known? These questions stayed with him as he rode across the fields and worked with the cattle. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned orange and purple, Jake sat on a fence post and thought about the days ahead. He realized that marriage was not just about companionship. It was about trust, respect, and understanding. He resolved to approach the situation with an open heart. If he treated her with kindness and patience, perhaps they could build something real, something that went beyond appearances or expectations. The day of the wedding drew closer, and Jake noticed a mixture of anticipation and anxiety in himself. He tried to prepare mentally for meeting her, for the ceremony, and for the life that awaited him. He knew that once the veil was lifted, everything would change. But for now, all he could do was continue his work, keep his mind sharp, and remain steady. Life on the ranch had always taught him patience, and now that lesson would be more important than ever. As the night fell and the stars filled the sky, Jake felt a sense of calm wash over him. He had made a choice, faced the unknown, and taken a step into a future that was uncertain but full of possibilities. Whatever happened next, he promised himself that he would handle it with honesty, courage, and respect. He didn't know what his bride looked like, what she thought, or how she would feel about him, but he knew one thing for certain: he was ready to face the challenge. And so, under the quiet night sky, the cowboy prepared himself for the journey ahead, a journey that would test his character, reveal hidden truths, and ultimately show him that life often holds surprises far beyond what the eye can see. After agreeing to Mr. Thompson's unusual proposal, Jake tried to focus on his daily work, but he found it increasingly difficult. The thought of marrying someone he barely knew was constantly on his mind. Every sunrise he rode across the fields, tending to the cattle and fixing fences, yet his thoughts kept returning to the approaching wedding. He wondered what she would be like, how she would act, and whether they would even get along. The townspeople didn't make it any easier. Soon after the announcement of Jake's engagement, whispers began to circulate everywhere he went. At the general store, people stared at him as he picked up supplies. At the saloon, quiet chuckles followed him when he walked past. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others offered sympathetic smiles. "Poor Jake," one woman muttered under her breath. "He's marrying that girl. Are you sure he knows what he's doing?" Jake ignored the gossip as best as he could. He had always been used to people talking, but he now realized that some conversations were sharper and more curious than usual. He focused instead on preparing himself to meet the woman he would be marrying. He knew very little about her, and that both frightened and excited him. Mr. Thompson, aware of Jake's concerns, called him to the ranch one afternoon. Jake rode the familiar path through the fields, the sun warming his back. The ranch gates creaked as he entered, and Mr. Thompson met him near the stables. "Jake," Mr. Thompson began, "I know this isn't easy for you, but remember, my daughter is not what people say. She is strong, intelligent, and kind. I only warned others about her appearance to see if you would focus on what really matters." Jake listened carefully. "I understand, sir," he replied. "It's just, I've never married before and I don't know what to expect. I want to do this right." Mr. Thompson nodded. "That is exactly why I chose you. You have integrity, and that will matter more than anything else." "Treat her well, Jake," respect her, and remember, appearances can be misleading. The advice stayed with Jake. He realized that the real challenge wasn't just the marriage itself, but learning to see beyond first impressions. He also knew that preparation would be important, not just for the wedding day, but for building a life together. Over the next few weeks, Jake threw himself into getting ready. He cleaned and polished his boots and clothes, making sure he looked presentable. He practiced walking with confidence, speaking politely, and controlling his nervousness. But more than that, he spent time thinking about how to treat his bride with respect and kindness. He reminded himself that she was a person with feelings, hopes, and dreams, just like him. Meanwhile, the townspeople continued to talk. Children asked questions about the ugly bride, and neighbors whispered behind closed doors. Jake could feel their eyes on him whenever he passed by. At first, he was irritated by their judgment, but eventually he began to feel sorry for them. They didn't know the full story, and they were judging without understanding. This made him more determined to see the truth for himself and to approach the situation with an open mind. As the wedding day approached, preparations on Mr. Thompson's estate became busy. Decorations were chosen, flowers arranged, and the house cleaned from top to bottom. Every detail mattered to Mr. Thompson, who wanted the day to be perfect. Jake observed the preparations, quietly noting the effort involved. It reminded him that marriage wasn't just about a ceremony. It was about creating a life together, building memories, and honoring commitments. Despite his busy schedule, Jake tried to learn more about his future wife. He asked Mr. Thompson about her favorite things, her daily routines, and the hobbies she enjoyed. He discovered that she liked reading in the quiet afternoons, walking along the nearby hills, and tending to animals. She was gentle, thoughtful, and intelligent. Each detail helped Jake imagine what life might be like with her, and it eased some of his nervousness. He began to feel a small excitement, a curiosity about the woman behind the veil. Jake also spent time reflecting on his own qualities. He thought about what he could bring to the marriage: his honesty, his hard work, his willingness to care for another person. He realized that the wedding was not just a test for her, but for him as well. He had to be a partner who could listen, respect, and support her in every way. This reflection helped him grow more confident, not only as a cowboy, but as someone who could be trusted and loved. As the days drew closer, Jake also faced his own fears. He worried about rejection, about whether his efforts would be enough, and about the moment when the veil would finally come off. But he knew that worry alone would not help him. Instead, he focused on staying calm, being patient, and preparing himself for the reality of marriage. He reminded himself that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. On one quiet afternoon, Jake decided to take a walk along the hills near the ranch. The sun was warm, the grass soft under his boots, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers. He thought about the future, imagining small moments of happiness, sharing a meal, talking late into the night, or simply walking together in silence. These thoughts comforted him and gave him hope that, despite the uncertainty, life could be full of surprises and joy. Back at the ranch, Mr. Thompson continued to prepare his daughter for the wedding as well. He encouraged her to be patient, kind, and open to the man she would soon meet. Though she had been told about Jake and his qualities, she too felt nervous. She didn't know what he looked like beyond the occasional glimpses around town, and she didn't know how he would react when he saw her for the first time. Like Jake, she was stepping into the unknown, guided by trust and curiosity. The night before the wedding, Jake sat outside his small home, looking up at the stars. He reflected on everything that had happened: the offer, the preparation, the anticipation. He realized that this was more than just a marriage. It was a test of character, patience, and understanding. It was an opportunity to build a life not just on appearances, but on respect, trust, and genuine connection. He felt a mix of nerves and excitement, but he also felt ready. He had learned that rushing into judgments or letting fear control his actions would only create obstacles. Instead, he chose to embrace the unknown with an open heart, ready to meet the woman behind the veil without prejudice or expectation. And so, as the stars twinkled overhead and the quiet night wrapped around him, Jake prepared himself for the next chapter of his life. He didn't know what the wedding day would bring or how his bride would respond, but he knew one thing for certain: he would face it with honesty, courage, and kindness. The stage was set. The town was buzzing with curiosity. And Jake, the cowboy with a heart full of determination, was ready to step into a future that promised surprises, challenges, and perhaps a happiness he had never imagined. The morning of the wedding arrived with a golden sunrise that bathed the countryside in warm light. Jake woke earlier than usual, his heart pounding with a mix of nervousness and anticipation. Today was the day he would meet his bride face to face for the first time. He had spent weeks preparing himself, both mentally and physically, yet nothing could fully prepare him for the moment when he would finally lift the veil. He dressed carefully, selecting his best clothes and polishing his boots until they shone in the sunlight. Each movement felt deliberate, as if the act of preparing himself could calm the storm of emotions within. He looked at his reflection in the small mirror, trying to steady his thoughts. He reminded himself that kindness and patience mattered more than appearances. The woman he would marry was more than what others had said about her, and he had to remember that. As he rode toward Mr. Thompson's estate, the town seemed unusually quiet. Perhaps it was the anticipation of the wedding, or perhaps the townspeople had gathered along the roads, curious to see the cowboy and his bride. Jake noticed small groups of people peeking from behind fences and windows, whispering to each other. He felt a pang of self-consciousness but reminded himself that today was about the bride and him, not the opinions of others. Upon arriving at the estate, Jake dismounted and took a deep breath. The estate was buzzing with activity. Servants and staff moved about, arranging flowers, adjusting ribbons, and preparing the house for guests. The air was filled with the scent of roses and fresh greenery. Children ran past, giggling with excitement, and a few townspeople lingered outside trying to catch glimpses of the bride. Jake tried not to let it distract him. Mr. Thompson approached him with a nod. "Jake," he said in his usual firm tone, "everything is ready. Remember what I told you. Treat her with respect and don't let appearances guide your heart." "I understand, sir," Jake replied, though he felt his hands tremble slightly. He had never been so nervous in his life. The weight of the day pressed on him, but he knew he had to remain calm. Inside the estate, preparations for the ceremony were equally intense. The room where the bride would stand was adorned with flowers, candles, and delicate decorations. Light streamed through the large windows, illuminating the space in a soft glow. Jake could hear the faint rustle of fabric and the quiet footsteps of his bride as she moved about, still behind the veil. When the time came, guests began to take their seats. Family, friends, and townspeople filled the room, all eyes turning toward the doorway where the ceremony would soon begin. Jake stood near the altar, trying to steady his breathing. He could hear his own heartbeat, loud and steady, as he prepared for the moment that would change his life. The doors opened and the bride appeared fully veiled. Jake's breath caught. He could not see her face, only the delicate fabric covering her, but he could feel her presence. She moved gracefully, with a quiet dignity that immediately commanded respect. The whispers among the guests grew softer, replaced by an air of anticipation and curiosity. Jake noticed that she held herself with poise, her hands folded gently in front of her. Her posture was straight, her shoulders relaxed, and yet there was a certain tension in the way she walked, nervousness mixed with quiet confidence. Jake felt a strange connection, even without seeing her face. The ceremony began with the officiant speaking in a calm, measured voice. Words of commitment, respect, and partnership filled the room. Jake listened carefully, feeling the significance of each phrase. He realized that this moment was not just a formal event. It was a promise, a step into a shared life. He glanced at the veiled figure before him and felt a deep responsibility. He had agreed to this marriage not for appearances, not for wealth, but because he saw value in character, honesty, and trust. As the ceremony progressed, Jake's nerves continued to simmer beneath the surface. He could feel the eyes of the townspeople on him, but he tried to focus solely on the woman before him. He reminded himself that this was a test, not of him, but of how he would approach the unknown. He needed to remain steady, patient, and respectful. Finally, the moment arrived. The officiant, with a gentle nod, indicated that Jake should lift the veil. Jake's hands felt heavier than usual, and his pulse quickened. He approached his bride slowly, taking care not to rush. He reached out, fingers brushing the delicate fabric, and hesitated for a brief moment. Then, with a deep breath, he lifted the veil. Jake's eyes widened, and for a moment he was speechless. The woman before him was not what he or anyone had expected. She was not ugly, as the rumors had suggested. She was beautiful, with clear, bright eyes that reflected warmth and intelligence. Her hair framed her face perfectly, and her gentle smile lit up the room. He could hardly believe it. The descriptions he had heard, the whispers from the town, the expectations he had carried, all of it melted away in an instant. She was more than he had imagined, and yet the beauty he saw was not just in her face. It was in her presence, her calm confidence, and the kindness that radiated from her eyes. For a moment, Jake simply stood there, taking it all in. He realized that his journey to this moment had been about more than appearances. It had been about patience, courage, and trust. He had approached this marriage with an open heart, and now he saw the reward of that approach. His bride smiled softly, her eyes meeting his. There was no fear, no judgment, only a quiet understanding. Jake felt a surge of relief and joy. He stepped closer, taking her hand gently. It's wonderful to meet you," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt. She nodded, her smile growing. "I'm glad we're meeting this way," she replied. "I've been nervous too, but I think we'll manage just fine." The room seemed to brighten with the exchange. Guests whispered among themselves, but Jake and his bride remained focused on each other. There was a shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement that appearances could never define the value of a person. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur of words, vows, and quiet laughter. Jake listened intently as promises were made, realizing that this was the true meaning of the day. It was not about what others thought, nor about the rumors or expectations. It was about two people stepping into a life together, guided by trust, respect, and honesty. When the ceremony concluded, Jake and his bride walked down the aisle together, hand in hand. The townspeople, who had once whispered and gossiped, now watched with admiration and curiosity. Jake could feel the warmth of their attention, but he remained focused on her. He realized that the real journey was just beginning. Outside the estate, the sun shone brightly, casting a warm glow over the fields and gardens. The couple walked together, sharing quiet words and gentle smiles. Jake felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the beauty he now saw, but for the lesson he had learned. Life often surprised those who approached it with honesty and courage. As the day drew to a close, Jake reflected on the experience. The nervousness, the preparation, and the anticipation had all led to this moment, a meeting that surpassed every expectation. He realized that the journey was more important than the destination, that patience and openness could reveal truths hidden beneath the surface. And so, with the first day of their marriage complete, Jake felt a sense of calm and excitement. He had met his bride, lifted the veil, and discovered a beauty that went far beyond what anyone had said. The wedding was not just a ceremony. It was the beginning of a partnership built on respect, trust, and shared understanding. For Jake, the cowboy who had once worried about appearances and expectations, the lesson was clear. Life rewards those who approach the unknown with courage, honesty, and an open heart. And as he walked beside his bride, hand in hand, he felt ready for whatever adventures awaited them, knowing that together they could face anything. After the wedding ceremony, the newly married couple retired to a quiet room in the estate, away from the eyes of the curious townspeople. Jake's heart was still racing, though the initial shock of meeting his bride had already settled into a mix of awe and relief. She was beautiful, yes, but more importantly, she carried herself with a warmth and intelligence that Jake admired deeply. Yet despite the charm and elegance he had witnessed, there was still a sense of mystery surrounding her. The veil had only covered part of the truth, and Jake could sense that there was more to discover. He noticed the subtle movements of her hands, the way she tilted her head when listening, and the calm steadiness in her voice. These small details fascinated him. She was quiet but not shy, observant but not judgmental. Every little gesture revealed layers of her personality, and Jake realized he was drawn not only to her appearance but to the person she truly was. His bride, sensing his curiosity and nervousness, smiled softly. "Jake," she said, "you seem surprised." "I hope I did not shock you too much." Jake chuckled a bit awkwardly. You're not what anyone described. I mean, you're amazing. I just wasn't expecting," he paused, searching for the right words. "I wasn't expecting this." She laughed lightly, a sound that felt like a gentle breeze in the quiet room. "I think people like to exaggerate stories," she said, "and perhaps my father wanted to see if you would focus on appearances or on the person beneath the surface. Looks can be deceiving, you know." Jake nodded, feeling a mix of relief and admiration. He realized that the rumors, the warnings, and even the description of her as ugly had been a test, one that he had passed without even realizing it. It wasn't his physical attraction that had guided him but his sense of character, his honesty, and his willingness to approach the unknown with an open heart. The room was quiet for a moment, both of them taking in the significance of what had just happened. Jake looked at her more closely, noticing the small details he hadn't seen before, the way her eyes sparkled when she smiled, the gentle curve of her lips, and the calm, confident way she carried herself. Every feature seemed to reflect not only beauty but kindness, patience, and thoughtfulness. "I have to admit," Jake said finally, "I was nervous. I didn't know what to expect, but now I feel happy, really happy. I think this is going to work out better than I imagined." She reached out and took his hand, her touch warm and reassuring. "I'm glad to hear that, Jake. I was nervous too. I didn't know if we would connect, if we would understand each other, but now I think we can." Their conversation continued, flowing naturally despite the earlier tension. They shared small stories about their lives, their hopes for the future, and the little things that made them who they were. Jake spoke about his life on the ranch, the challenges he faced with the land and the cattle, and the simple joys that made his days worthwhile. She listened intently, asking questions and offering insights, showing genuine interest in his experiences. In turn, she spoke about her own life, the quiet hours she spent reading, her love for the outdoors, and the dreams she had long kept to herself. Jake realized that, beneath the initial mystery, she was not only intelligent but thoughtful and compassionate. He found himself admiring her even more with every word she spoke. As the afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, Jake noticed the delicate way she adjusted the veil that still partially covered her hair. He understood that the full reveal was still to come, that there were more surprises waiting. Yet, he felt no fear or doubt. Instead, he felt a growing excitement, a curiosity to discover every aspect of her personality and character. Suddenly, she spoke softly, almost hesitantly. "Jake, would you like to see the rest of me?" Jake's heart skipped a beat. He nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. He knew that the moment was coming, the true reveal, the unveiling of her full self beyond the veil. But he also felt confident. He had already seen her beauty, yes, but now it was about understanding her fully, about appreciating every detail of who she was as a person. With a gentle motion, she lifted the veil completely. Jake blinked, taking in the full sight. She was breathtaking. Her face, now completely visible, reflected not just beauty but strength, intelligence, and warmth. Her eyes, bright and expressive, seemed to tell a story of patience and resilience. Her smile was genuine, radiating kindness and confidence. For a moment, Jake simply stared, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions: surprise, admiration, relief, and joy. He realized that the rumors, the exaggerated warnings, and even the doubts he had carried were all irrelevant. None of it mattered. What mattered was the person standing before him, the woman who had captured his respect and attention in ways he had never imagined. She laughed lightly, noticing his reaction. "You seem impressed," she said, teasing gently. Jake shook his head, smiling broadly. "Impressed doesn't even begin to describe it," he replied. I honestly don't know what I expected, but this is beyond anything I imagined." "You're incredible." She reached out again, taking his hand in hers. "Thank you, Jake. I was nervous too, about whether you would see me for who I really am, not just what others said. But now I feel like we understand each other already." Jake felt a warmth spread through his chest. He realized that this moment was more than just a reveal. It was a connection, a bond that had formed in the brief hours they had spent together. He understood that true beauty was not about looks alone, but about kindness, intelligence, and the ability to see and understand another person. The room seemed to glow with a quiet happiness. Jake and his bride sat together, talking and laughing softly, discovering common interests and shared values. They spoke about the ranch, about life in the countryside, and about dreams for the future. Every conversation deepened their understanding of each other, and Jake felt a growing certainty that he had made the right decision. As the day turned to evening, the couple decided to take a walk through the estate's gardens. The air was warm, filled with the scent of blooming flowers. Birds chirped in the trees, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. Jake felt a sense of peace, walking beside his bride, knowing that the journey they had begun was one of respect, trust, and genuine affection. They paused by a small fountain, the water sparkling in the late afternoon light. Jake looked at her, feeling a sense of gratitude and wonder. "I never expected today to be like this," he said softly. "But now I feel hopeful. I think we're going to have something really special," she smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "I feel the same way, Jake. I think this is the start of something wonderful. We've taken a step into the unknown and we're doing it together." In that moment, Jake realized the full significance of the day. It was not just about the wedding ceremony or the veil being lifted. It was about trust, courage, and the willingness to see beyond appearances. It was about taking a risk, embracing the unknown, and discovering the truth for oneself. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow across the gardens. Jake and his bride continued their walk, hand in hand, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. The townspeople who had once whispered and judged would never understand the depth of what had happened, but Jake and his bride didn't mind. They had discovered something far more valuable than gossip or appearances. They had discovered each other. By the time they returned to the estate, the stars were beginning to twinkle in the night sky. Jake felt a sense of calm and contentment, knowing that the day had brought not only surprises but also a deeper understanding of life, love, and human connection. He realized that the tests, the doubts, and even the fears had led to a moment of clarity, a moment that would guide the rest of their lives together. As they prepared for the evening, Jake looked at his bride once more. "Today has been incredible," he said. "I feel like I've learned so much, not just about you, but about myself as well. I want us to build a life together based on respect, trust, and honesty." She nodded, her eyes reflecting the same determination and warmth. "I want the same, Jake. I think we can make this work, as long as we continue to support each other and be open to learning along the way." And so, as the night settled over the estate and the stars shone brightly above, Jake and his bride began the next chapter of their lives. They had faced uncertainty, embraced the unknown, and discovered a truth that went far beyond appearances. The journey ahead would have challenges, but it would also be filled with trust, understanding, and the promise of a shared future. For Jake, the cowboy who had once worried about rumors and appearances, the lesson was clear. Real beauty is found in character, kindness, and the courage to see the truth for oneself. And as he held his bride's hand, he felt ready for whatever adventures awaited them, knowing that together they could face anything life had to offer. The days following the wedding were filled with a quiet joy that neither Jake nor his bride had ever known before. The ceremony was over, the veil had been lifted, and the whispers of the townspeople began to fade into the background. For Jake, the cowboy who had once worried about appearances and expectations, life now felt brighter and fuller. He was married to a woman he respected, admired, and already cared for deeply. And though the road ahead was unknown, he felt ready to face it, hand in hand with his bride. The first mornings of their life together were simple yet meaningful. Jake woke early, as he always had, to tend to the ranch and the animals. But now, his bride joined him whenever she could. She moved gracefully through the stables, helping him feed the horses and gather the cattle. Though she had not grown up on a ranch, she learned quickly, listening carefully to Jake's instructions and asking thoughtful questions. Her enthusiasm and willingness to learn impressed him, and he found himself smiling more than he had in years. In turn, she discovered the joys of life on the ranch. She loved the quiet hours spent under the open sky, the sound of the wind through the trees, and the rhythm of life that followed the seasons. Every morning brought new tasks and small victories, and she approached each one with patience and care. Together, they discovered that work could be more than just labor. It could be a shared experience, a way to build trust and connection. As the weeks passed, Jake and his bride grew closer, learning more about each other with every passing day. They shared meals together, sometimes in the warm kitchen of the estate, other times outdoors under the shade of a large oak tree. They spoke about their dreams, their fears, and the small joys that made life meaningful. Jake learned about her love for reading, her fascination with stories from distant lands, and her gentle way of seeing the world. She discovered Jake's quiet humor, his love for animals, and the deep sense of responsibility that guided his every action. The townspeople, who had once whispered and judged, began to notice the change. They saw a couple who respected and cared for each other, who worked together and supported one another. Slowly, curiosity turned to admiration. Children waved when they passed by, and neighbors offered friendly smiles. Some even came to the ranch to learn from Jake and his bride, curious about the way they handled their work and their life together. Despite the growing admiration, Jake and his bride remained grounded. They did not seek approval or attention. They were focused on building a life that was meaningful to them. They learned to communicate openly, to share their thoughts and concerns without fear, and to support each other in every task, large or small. Each day brought new challenges, but they faced them together, knowing that unity and understanding were stronger than any obstacle. One afternoon, as the sun bathed the fields in golden light, Jake and his bride sat by a small creek that ran along the edge of the ranch. The water sparkled as it flowed gently over the rocks, and the air was filled with the soft songs of birds. They had spent the morning checking fences and feeding the animals, and now they were taking a quiet moment for themselves. Jake looked at her and smiled. "I never imagined life could feel like this," he said softly. "I used to think marriage would be about expectations, about following what others said. But now, I see it's about partnership, understanding, and sharing life with someone you respect. She smiled back, her eyes reflecting warmth and happiness. I feel the same way, Jake. I was nervous at first about what marriage would be like, about whether we would connect. But now, I see that the important part isn't how we started, but how we continue together. Their hands found each other's, fingers intertwined naturally. In that moment, they understood that their marriage was not just a formal arrangement, but a partnership built on trust, patience, and care. Each small act of kindness, every shared task, every moment of understanding strengthened the bond between them. As the seasons changed, Jake and his bride continued to grow together. Spring brought new life to the ranch, with green pastures and blooming flowers. Summer brought long, warm days filled with hard work and laughter. Autumn painted the hills with shades of orange and gold, and winter brought quiet nights by the fire, sharing stories and dreams. Throughout it all, they faced challenges, celebrated victories, and supported each other in times of difficulty. One particularly challenging day came when a sudden storm swept across the countryside. Heavy rain poured down, and strong winds threatened the fences and the animals. Jake and his bride worked tirelessly, securing the animals, repairing broken fences, and making sure the ranch was safe. Exhausted but determined, they faced the storm together, finding strength in their unity. When the skies cleared and the sun returned, they looked at each other and smiled, knowing that they could overcome anything as long as they were together. Beyond the work on the ranch, they discovered joy in the small, everyday moments. Sharing breakfast by the window, watching the sunset together, or simply walking through the fields in silence became precious parts of their life. They laughed at small mistakes, comforted each other during difficult times, and celebrated even the smallest victories. Each day brought a deeper understanding of the person beside them, and with that understanding came love, respect, and admiration. Jake also noticed how the townspeople's attitude had changed. The gossip that had once followed him disappeared, replaced by genuine respect. People admired the way he treated his bride, not as a test, not as a task, but as a partner. Children looked up to them as an example of kindness and patience, and neighbors sought their advice on relationships, work, and life. Jake realized that their marriage had become more than just a personal journey. It had inspired others in subtle, meaningful ways. Over time, Jake and his bride also began to think about the future. They spoke about expanding the ranch, planting new crops, and raising more animals. They dreamed about building a family, teaching children the values they cherished: honesty, hard work, respect, and kindness. They planned not just for the present but for the generations that would come after them, imagining a life filled with love, growth, and shared purpose. One quiet evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Jake looked at his bride and reflected on the journey they had taken together. From the moment he agreed to the unusual proposal, through the anticipation, the wedding, and the reveal, they had grown closer and stronger. He realized that every challenge, every moment of doubt, and every decision had led them to this point, a life built on trust, understanding, and mutual respect. "I never imagined life could be this full," Jake said, his voice filled with emotion. "I thought marriage would be difficult, full of expectations and uncertainty, but now I see it's about partnership, about sharing every moment and supporting each other no matter what." She reached for his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "I feel the same way, Jake. Life is full of surprises and we've learned to face them together. That's what makes it meaningful. That's what makes it ours." As the years passed, Jake and his bride continued to grow, both as individuals and as a couple. They faced challenges, celebrated victories, and built a life filled with love, laughter, and understanding. Their bond deepened with every passing day, and the lessons they had learned, the importance of character, trust, patience, and openness, remained at the heart of their relationship. The The story of the cowboy and his bride became known throughout the town and the surrounding countryside. People spoke of their partnership, not as a tale of appearances or gossip, but as a story of courage, respect, and the rewards of seeing beyond the surface. They became a quiet inspiration, showing that real happiness comes from understanding, patience, and the willingness to embrace the unknown. And so, Jake and his bride lived a life that was rich not just in work or achievements, but in love, trust, and shared purpose. They learned that the true beauty of life lay not in what others said or expected, but in the connections they built, the kindness they shared, and the respect they held for each other. Every day brought new adventures, new lessons, and new moments of joy. Looking back, Jake realized that agreeing to Mr. Thompson's proposal had been more than just a decision. It had been a turning point. It had taught him about courage, patience, and the value of seeing people for who they truly were. And in the woman who had stood by him, supported him, and shared his life, he had found a partner, a friend, and a source of inspiration. Together, they faced each day with hope, determination, and love. They knew that life would continue to present challenges, but they also knew that whatever came, they would face it together, as partners, as friends, and as a family. Their story, born from an unusual beginning, had become a testament to the power of trust, kindness, and the courage to embrace the unknown. And so, under the wide, open skies and amidst the rolling hills of the countryside, the cowboy and his bride built a life full of happiness, growth, and love. A life that proved that real beauty is found in character, connection, and the shared journey of two hearts willing to face the world together.